Look at your fingertips for a second. Seriously. Hold up your hand and look closely at those tiny ridges spiraling and looping across your skin. They've been with you since before you were born. They survived every scraped knee, every paper cut, every dish you've washed, every phone you've dropped, every handshake you've ever given. And yet, almost nobody ever stops to ask the obvious question. Why do they exist? Because here's the strange part. Almost every primate has fingerprints. Koalas have fingerprints so similar to ours they've reportedly confused forensic investigators. But cows don't have them. Horses don't. Lions don't. Whales definitely don't. So somewhere during our evolutionary journey, nature decided that tiny ridges on our fingertips were worth keeping for millions of years. Evolution is brutally efficient. It doesn't preserve useless features forever. If something costs energy to develop and maintain, there has to be a reason. So what exactly are fingerprints doing? The answer is much stranger than most people realize. It involves climbing trees, ancient rainforests, developing babies, microscopic sweat glands, friction, and one scientific mystery that researchers are still debating today. Let's go back. About 70 million years ago, long before humans existed, Earth's forests were filled with early mammals living almost entirely in the trees. Life in the canopy was dangerous. Every branch was a potential fall. Every leap carried consequences. If your hands slipped, gravity won. Unlike large ground animals, tree-dwelling mammals depended on incredibly precise grip. Their survival wasn't just about strength. It was about control. Over millions of years, primates evolved flexible shoulders, rotating wrists, opposable thumbs, and highly sensitive fingertips. But there was still one problem. Skin. Human skin might feel smooth from a distance, but under magnification it's surprisingly complicated. It's constantly producing sweat, shedding cells, repairing tiny injuries, and adapting to pressure. A perfectly smooth fingertip sounds ideal. Except it isn't. Imagine trying to hold a wet glass with two pieces of polished rubber pressed together. The contact becomes unstable. Tiny layers of moisture reduce friction exactly when you need it most. Nature solved this problem with ridges. Those raised patterns slightly change how your skin contacts an object. Instead of one large flat surface, your fingertips touch through thousands of microscopic high points. That increases grip in surprisingly clever ways. But here's where scientists disagree. For decades, one explanation dominated textbooks. Fingerprints increase friction. Simple. Logical. Easy to understand. Except experiments kept producing confusing results. Some studies found increased grip. Others found almost no improvement. Some even suggested smooth skin could generate more friction under certain conditions. Suddenly, the obvious answer wasn't so obvious anymore. Then researchers started looking closer. Much closer. Using microscopes and pressure-sensitive imaging, scientists discovered that fingerprint ridges don't simply make your fingers rough. They deform. Every ridge bends, compresses, stretches, and rebounds while touching a surface. Instead of acting like tiny tire treads, they behave more like microscopic suspension systems. That's an important difference. When your finger slides across an object, those ridges create tiny vibrations inside the skin. Those vibrations travel directly to specialized nerve endings buried beneath the surface. Your brain doesn't just feel touch. It reads vibration. Think about reading Braille. Blind readers can distinguish incredibly small differences in raised dots at remarkable speeds. They're not doing that because their fingers are stronger. They're doing it because their fingertips deliver extraordinarily detailed sensory information. Fingerprints may actually improve touch more than grip. In other words, your fingertips aren't simply grabbing the world. They're scanning it. Every texture. Every scratch. Every grain of wood. Every wrinkle in paper. Every fabric. Every keyboard key. Your fingerprints help convert physical contact into rich streams of information your brain can interpret almost instantly. That's incredible. But the mystery gets even deeper. Because fingerprints begin forming before you're born. Around the 10th week of pregnancy, tiny swellings appear on the developing fingertips of a fetus. These structures, called volar pads, briefly rise beneath the skin. As the fetus grows, the pads gradually shrink. Meanwhile, the outer skin continues expanding. The interaction between those two growth rates creates mechanical stresses across the fingertip. Those stresses determine where ridges begin forming. Tiny differences inside the womb completely change the final pattern. Pressure, growth speed, position, amniotic fluid. Even slight differences in finger movement. Every variable influences the final design. That's why even identical twins, who share nearly identical DNA, do not have identical fingerprints. Their genes establish the overall blueprint. But the final pattern emerges through developmental randomness. Nature writes the outline. Chance finishes the artwork. That's astonishing when you think about it. Every human who has ever lived has carried a pattern that has never existed before and will never exist again. Not because evolution wanted unique identification. That's simply an accidental consequence of embryonic development. Of course, humans eventually realized how useful that uniqueness was. Thousands of years ago, fingerprints were already being used in surprising ways. Ancient Babylonian merchants sometimes pressed fingerprints into clay tablets while recording business transactions. In ancient China, handprints and fingerprints appeared on legal documents centuries before modern science understood what fingerprints even were. People noticed they were unique long before anyone understood why. Then came the 19th century. As cities expanded and crime increased, governments searched for reliable ways to identify people. Names could be changed. Documents could be forged. Faces changed with age. Fingerprints didn't. In the late 1800s, researchers began carefully comparing fingerprint patterns across thousands of individuals. They found something extraordinary. No two matched. Not once. Soon, fingerprint classification systems spread across police departments around the world. Suddenly, one of evolution's oldest biological features became one of humanity's most powerful forensic tools. Today, billions of fingerprints sit inside criminal databases. Every unlocked smartphone. Every passport scanner. Every biometric security system. All relying on tiny skin ridges that originally evolved millions of years before locks even existed. Evolution never planned that. Humans simply repurposed an ancient biological solution for a completely different problem. But fingerprints do something else most people never notice. They sweat constantly. Not enough to drip. Just enough. Your fingertips contain one of the highest concentrations of eccrine sweat glands anywhere on your body. Each ridge contains microscopic pores releasing tiny amounts of moisture. That sounds counterproductive. Wouldn't sweat make objects slippery? Only if there's too much. Very small amounts actually improve contact between skin and many surfaces. Too little moisture reduces grip. Too much reduces grip. Evolution seems to have settled on a remarkably balanced system. Enough moisture for sensitivity. Not enough to become unstable. Again, the human body behaves less like a machine and more like an incredibly refined engineering project. And then there's wear. Think about everything your fingertips survive. Typing. Cooking. Gardening. Weightlifting. Rock climbing. Construction work. Musical instruments. Despite constant abuse, fingerprints almost always return after injuries heal. Why? Because the pattern isn't stored on the surface. It's encoded much deeper inside the skin. Unless damage destroys those deeper layers completely, new skin grows using the original blueprint. Your fingerprints effectively rebuild themselves. That's why burns or cuts often disappear over time while the ridges quietly return. Nature designed them to last. Interestingly, some rare genetic conditions cause people to be born without fingerprints at all. One condition, sometimes nicknamed immigration delay disease, creates perfectly functional individuals who simply lack fingerprint ridges. Their biggest modern challenge isn't gripping objects. It's passing through biometric border security. Sometimes technology depends on biology in unexpected ways. Researchers are still studying fingerprints today. Some scientists believe the ridges optimize grip under changing conditions. Others argue sensory enhancement remains their primary purpose. Many now think both explanations are true simultaneously. Evolution rarely solves only one problem at a time. One adaptation often produces multiple advantages. A better grip. Better touch. Better moisture control. Greater durability. Improved manipulation. All working together. That layered efficiency appears again and again throughout biology. Feathers evolved before flight. Bones originally evolved for support before becoming tools for movement. The human larynx produces speech despite evolving long before language existed. Evolution constantly repurposes existing structures into new functions. Fingerprints fit perfectly into that pattern. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of this story. When you unlock your phone with your thumb, you're using a feature that first evolved for ancestors navigating tree branches millions of years before humans existed. When detectives identify someone from a fingerprint left on glass, they're relying on developmental randomness inside a womb. When musicians glide across piano keys. When surgeons hold delicate instruments. When artists sketch. When children learn to write. Those tiny ridges quietly perform work so subtle that most of us never notice them. That's often how evolution works. The most important adaptations become invisible because they've always been there. You don't think about your heartbeat every second. You don't consciously appreciate your immune system while you're healthy. And you probably never thank your fingerprints every time you pick something up without dropping it. Yet they've been helping you since before your first breath. Millions of years of evolutionary experimentation produced one of the most sophisticated touch sensors ever built. Not in a laboratory. Not by engineers. But by countless generations surviving just a little better than the ones before them. So the next time you absent-mindedly scroll your phone, grip a coffee mug, shake someone's hand, or trace your fingers across a wooden table, remember this. You're looking at one of evolution's oldest signatures. Tiny ridges carrying the story of climbing primates, developing embryos, microscopic physics, and millions of years of natural selection. All hidden in the palm of your hand.